Lookout Mountain. As far as I could see, I was looking for the woman made a monkey out of me. I come down to the depot in time to catch a cannonball. Got the blues, Chattanooga. I won't be back till late next fall. Daddy, sweet daddy, I know you're gonna quit me now, but I don't need no daddy no how. Oh, trouble, trouble is all I ever find. Going back to Johnson City, what a way you off my mind.
There was nothing there in the way of development when the railroad arrived in 1856. A man by the name of Henry Johnson built a general store, and later there was a post office included in the store, and the railroad had a water tank there, and the railroad named the spot Johnson's Tank, named for, of course, Henry Johnson being the local resident there. The tank and Henry Johnson's store was located on Brush Creek in about the vicinity of Betton, going across the mountains into Cranberry, and later out in the vicinity of Broadway and the present-day General Shale plant. So the plans were made, all three railroads joined on a unified plan to build a Union Station just off of Broadway, about where the present-day Marflow or Tennessee tank plant is located. It was in the Depression of 1893, which the historians call Cleveland's Panic. Cleveland was president at the time. Whoever was president when a depression came along, he got the credit or the honor for it, just as Hoover got the credit for the Great Depression of 1929. The foundations of the Union Station were actually built, and the wall construction got up several feet off of the foundations. When the crash of 1893 occurred, and the 3C Railroad abandoned their plans to construct into that area, had it not been for the crash of 1893, the Union Station would have been completed, and in that day and age, the railroad being your only means of transportation, both from freight coming in and out of the area, travelers coming in and out of the area, the mail, express, and it was prior to the coming of commercial telephones. Any communiques sent out went out over the railroad telegraph line, so the railroad depot was the hub of the community. But after the crash of 1893, the bankruptcy of the 3C Railroad, then the ET and WNC Railroad and the Southern Railroad built their stations down in the Fountain Square area. The Clinchfield coming in 1906, they also built their station there very close to the ET and WNC station. Each of the railroads then had their three separate depots, all within about a block of each other, and consequently then Johnson City, the main business district in the hub of Johnson City, grew in the Fountain Square area rather than down in the Broadway area. Well, naturally the city grew as a result of the coming of the railroads, because it gave them the element of transportation that was needed for industrial development. So the coming of the railroads really were responsible for the early growth and development of Johnson City.
Down in Johnson City, for hospitality, are the finest bunch of people in the state of Tennessee. I'm tired of roaming this way. Going back to Johnson City, I'll go back and stay someday.
City on September the 8th, 1880. If I live until next September, I'll be 100 years old. I started in the banking business in 1908. The name of the bank was Bank of Commerce. I was cashier of the bank, and I served over 50 years in the banking business. I'm now retired and live with my daughter Mickey here at 713 West Pine Street. I'm living now in the center of my grandfather's farm. This farm was bought by Mr. George L. Carter and was developed. Streets were run through here, and this part of town was developed. Further east here was what was known as the Lyle Farm. There was only one house on that farm. It was owned by Mr. Raymond Lyle, lived there. Mr. George L. Carter, who promoted the Clinchfield Railroad, bought the Lyle Farm and donated it to the state of Tennessee if they would establish a normal school here. I grew up just across the railroad track there on Tennessee Street. The house has been torn down now and occupied by the Gordon Furniture Company as a parking lot. It's about a mile from the main street down in Johnson City. There's been a lot of changes down on Main Street, down in town. Job's Opera House was where the Jones Vance drugstore is now, but it was on the second floor. I went there one of my first times to hear a lecture by ex-governor Bob Taylor. His lecture was on the fiddle and the bow. The opera house was crowded with people. I've seen the time when we didn't have any North Johnson City. There was nothing but farmland out there. There wasn't a building out there except 2 residences. I've seen a lot of changes in Johnson City, and I know there are going to be more.
All right, Jimmy, let's have a little of that Johnson City rag.
Ross McDowell, and I came to Johnson City in August 1911. I entered the normal school in October 1911. The school was late in opening as they were building a streetcar from the middle of town out to the school. And I remember quite well that my whole family went with me. I was a freshman in high school, and there were more high school students than normal school students. There were less than 100 normal school students and about 250 high school students. The reason we went out there, the old high school in Johnson City had been condemned, and they were building to build a new school upon what is known as Science Hill above our library. We had a great time the first year because the streetcar would break down and we'd sit on it a few blocks away from school because we didn't seem to care whether we were late or not. Sidney G. Gilbreth was the president, and he was rough on us. We had wonderful faculty, as we had the same teachers that were teaching the normal school students. At the time we went to the normal school, there was one dormitory, and that was for the girls, Carter Hall, and the boys were scattered all over town in different homes. One thing I remember quite well, that we were not permitted to have any parties on school nights. And I had a group in my sister's home. She lived near the normal school, and I had a group on a school night, and we actually pulled taffy, and we were all expelled by Sidney G. Gilbreth. And he talked to us as if we had committed mayhem or something worse. And he never did tell us when to come back. We asked him when we'd come back, and he said, I don't know whether I'll ever take you back. But we stayed out for a while, and then we just went back and went to class, and nothing was ever said. There's one thing that I remember from my early days. I used to mess with almost anything that came along, like basketball, and I was short, but I played that. I never will forget. We went on the basketball court with enough clothes on to weight us down. We had long black stockings and bloomers that would make uniforms for a whole team, and midi blouses. But we were properly dressed, thoroughly dressed, completely dressed, I might say, when we went out to play basketball. Gradually, the normal school added students. It had a good reputation, and from the early days after they got rid of the high school students there, they began adding more normal school students. It grew rapidly, and as that grew, it seemed as if the different services in town came along, and we could go to the moving picture show for 5 cents. And we used to, none of us had much money, and we used to walk from the normal school downtown. We had 2 paved streets. They were paved with brick, Main and Market, and we had a streetcar running down the middle of Main Street. We had sidewalks on our best street in town, where we had some of our best homes, and that was Watauga Avenue, and it was a wooden sidewalk, as I recall. The hotel, John Sevier, was opened in 1924. They had the most beautiful ballroom, and we had some wonderful occasions in that ballroom. They could take care of quite a large crowd. I came out of the foundry. It was Johnson Foundry Machine Company then, operated by my brother-in-law, Glenn Setzer. At the time of World War I, there was a machine shop and foundry and blacksmith shop that made up the company. And it was in the 20s that the company began spreading out, and they bought the lower part of this property and added a structural shop and an ornamental shop, and began fabricating steel products. Someplace along the line, it wasn't too much later, that the blacksmith shop was discontinued because welding took over some of the things that the blacksmith used to do. And then people had different ways of sharpening drills and a lot of things that the blacksmith did. He was one of the most important people in an industrial plant in the early days, but everybody wanted near the railroad. Now they want as far away from a thing like that as they can get. Nearly everything in Johnson City you find is started low, and then they move up and move up. That we have had just a sort of a steady growth in every area almost.
My name is John Wayne Cox, and I was born in Johnson City in 1949. And with the exception of 9 years that I spent in the American Army during the Vietnam era, I've lived here all my life. Back in the early 50s, I can't remember a date, but the old Tennessee Theater, which is now, I guess, the Capri, used to have live stage shows on Saturday night where they'd bring in country and western singers from, some from Nashville and a lot of the local people here, I suppose. And I guess the thing that always impressed me the most with that, and why I guess I remember it, was yodeling. That I was awful impressed with that, and I guess that's why I remember it. But we used to go about every Saturday night to see that. Johnson City back then was just Main Street and Market Street, really, and there wasn't too much for young kids on Market Street, so we kindly stayed on Main. And there were 3 theaters in downtown Johnson City then, and they changed the programs 3 times a week, and especially on Saturday for all the kids. It only cost 15 cents to go to the show then. If we all did our work, we'd get our allowance, usually about $50, and that was enough to take you to the show and buy you something to eat afterwards. There used to be a lot of restaurants and cafeterias downtown. Cress's was always our favorite hangout when we were growing up. That used to set in next to where Majestic Theater is today. And they made the best hot dogs in Johnson City. And all of us would get together, all us school kids that were in the class. We'd all go downtown together and go into Cress's and load up on the hot dogs. And sometimes we'd take them in a bag into the Majestic with us and sit in there and eat them. I don't think the manager cared too much for that, but we'd sneak them in. And we'd watch the movie and eat our hot dogs, and then we'd get out of there, and sometimes we'd go down to Jones Vance and get some ice cream or something. I guess it probably wouldn't impress too many young people today to do something like that, but that was all there was back then, and it didn't really bother anybody because we didn't have anything to miss. Then when I was a teenager, I guess about the time I was going to Science Hill back in '64, that's when the Kmart and everything started coming in, and the town started the beginning of its shift to the north. I don't really believe a lot of people here in town ever expected North Johnson City to become what it did over the years. I went into the Army in 1968, and I didn't get out until February of '77. I was home off and on during all that time, obviously, on leave. But I didn't really have a chance to be around the town and notice how day-to-day life really was. Well, after I got out and I came home, I had ample opportunity, and the town had changed quite a bit in 9 years. I guess a lot of things have, though. Seemed like some of the charm that the town used to have, I don't know, maybe that's not the right word, maybe its personality, I guess, had changed. I had been around the world, and I came home to live here because this was my home, this where all my relatives were, and somehow I just didn't recognize my home. Some of the old things were still there, but just wasn't the same kind of place. It reminded me more of a boom town out west, something that just kind of exploded overnight. I realized it didn't. It was a long period of time, I suppose, but to someone who had been gone, it was a real culture shock to come back and find everything changed so much. One day they imagined that Johnson City and Bristol and Kingsport will all be one giant town. I don't mean that maybe it'll happen in 10 years or 20 or even 30, but eventually I'd say it'll all grow together. I can't exactly say I'm crazy about the prospects of it, because the larger your town, the more complex your problems become, and you always just have to make sure, I think, as you grow, you know, when you learn to walk, you don't go running off, you take step by step, and I hope we do that.
Daddy, sweet daddy, I know you're gonna quit me now, but I don't need no daddy no how. trouble, trouble is all I ever find. Going back to Johnson City, what a way off my mind. Down in Johnson City, for hospitality, are the finest bunch of people in the state of Tennessee. I'm tired of roaming this way. Going back to Johnson City, I'll go back and stay someday.